OAS Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo del público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral. Que el cierre de brechas, que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces, nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement "quédate en casa", que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
This is a test of the English channel, outgoing English. Kathy on the English channel, good afternoon. In just a moment. Yes, is that better? Testing English. ¿Mejor, Magali? Ok, gracias.
Vamos.
Hello, testing English, Richard. ¿Cómo están ustedes? Hola, inglés. Richard, sí, ¿cómo están? Muchas gracias, señores.
Ahora nos vamos a español. Cabina de español. Luis Eduardo, muy bien, se escucha perfecto.
Sí.
Muchas gracias.
Cabina, muchas gracias.
Segunda cabina de español. Segunda cabina de español. Perfecto, se escucha muy bien.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, The Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo de lo público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement quédate en casa, que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. With your permission, we will now proceed to confirm the quorum for this afternoon. Shall we? Good afternoon, everyone. We will now complete the phase of testing audio and video, and having done both tests for those delegations that are connected outside of the Hall of the Americas, we have the following delegations connected and present here: Antigua and Barbuda, Bolivia, Brazil, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Dominica, El Salvador, Grenada, Guatemala, Honduras, Jamaica, Mexico, Panama, Paraguay, the Dominican Republic, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, Trinidad and Tobago, Uruguay, and Venezuela. We have quorum, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues. Following verification of the quorum by the Secretariat, I am pleased to declare open this special meeting of the Permanent Council, which has been convened at the request of the Permanent Mission of Mexico, as contained in document CP/INF 9380/22, for the purpose of celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law, in compliance with the mandate of Resolution 2974, which was adopted by the OAS General Assembly at its last regular session. Before proceeding, I wish to express my appreciation and thanks to the Permanent Mission of Mexico and the OAS Department of International Law for their efforts in bringing this special session to fruition. I would also like to acknowledge and thank our distinguished panelists for their presence today, both in person and virtually. On behalf of the Permanent Council, I extend to you a cordial welcome. Esteemed colleagues, in accordance with Article 43 of the Rules of Procedure of the Permanent Council, we will proceed to adopt the order of business for this meeting as contained in document CP/OD 2386/22. There being no observations, the order of business is hereby approved. Esteemed colleagues, as you may know, the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law, originally adopted in 1997 within the framework of the OAS Charter, and bearing in mind the Declaration of Panama on the Inter-American Contribution to the Development and Codification of International Law of 1996, represents the most important instrument to contribute to the development and codification of international law within the framework of the OAS. It also aims to promote the widest possible dissemination of the Inter-American legal system and foster cooperation in the development, dissemination, and teaching of international law in the hemisphere. In that context, in celebration of its 25th anniversary, this afternoon we will hear expert presentations from leading jurists and professors on the utility of this instrument to member states, as well as identifying specific activities that can be carried out within the program, as agreed to by the General Assembly in its Resolution 2974. The biographies of our distinguished panelists have been distributed by the Secretariat in document CP/INF 9420/22. Before we proceed, I would like to kindly request that our panelists respect the time allotted for their presentations. Your cooperation is greatly appreciated. Dear colleagues, following the agenda, I am pleased to offer the floor to Dr. Jean-Michel Arrigui, Secretary for Legal Affairs of the Organization of American States. Dr. Arrigui, welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam.
Madam Chair of the Permanent Council, Assistant Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of member states, observers, colleagues from the Secretariat, dear special guests. The Pan American Union and the OAS, since its start at the end of the 19th century, has been the primary source of international law in the region, both public and private, which includes all of the states of the Americas. Since its beginning, the purpose has been to create a common legal framework to ensure cooperation through treaties that include the broadest array of interstate and individual interests. The states have sought to ensure peace among the region as has not happened in any other region. The peaceful solution of controversies, the presence of a number of institutions that cover a wide array of human rights, political, financial, health-related, women's issues, agriculture, telecommunications, just to cite a few. All of these stem from agreements forged within the Pan American Union and its successor institution, the Organization of American States. Over 100 agreements have been negotiated and adopted under the aegis of the OAS. And we have all of them on file in an area close to my office. Many of you have come to visit that treasure chest, and those of you who do not are more than welcome to do so. Universal law, the understanding of the rights and responsibilities of states, the use of international waters, limitations on the use of force, the legal equality of states, the qualification and description of international private law, human rights, fighting corruption. These are some of the pioneering developments that we have undertaken within our organization. The Charter underscores it in Article 3, and that is that respect for international law is the underpinning of OAS activities, both treaties negotiated within the region and in other regions. But an agreement in and of itself is not sufficient. It must be known and applied. And that is even more important in light of the current set of affairs. It is extremely difficult to imagine a situation that is not being recognized and that does not involve domestic law and international law. Think for a moment just about the multiplicity of international affairs in terms of all of our different aspects. Components of cell phones that travel around the world, contracts, transactions, telecommunication standards, and we can do this in any other walk of legal life. The need for cooperation in criminal affairs, in personal affairs, in civil matters, the question of migration and immigration, which are not necessarily on the forefront of the newspapers, are nonetheless part and parcel of our daily lives, both in public and international private law. It is not just a question of relationships between and among states. It is a question of what is happening on the internal level. Today, judges must understand these agreements. International negotiators, all of you present here, must also understand the impact and the relationship that this has on the way we govern internally. The fundamental right, their daily relationships in all fields and walks of life. For some decades now, the Secretary General has been engaging in training and preparation. Speaking specifically since 1974, we have been hosting in conjunction with a legal committee a course on legal training in Rio de Janeiro. This course has seen well-known specialists and many people who are in positions of tremendous power today have been either students or teachers or both. It is a unique space for training jurists across the Americas. I am going to recognize the person who has been the most important trainer, and that is Augusto Trincade, a court from The Hague, and the former Chief Justice of the Inter-American Human Rights Court. Antonio Augusto taught for the first time in 1981, and since then he made an effort to come every year to teach there. Many PhD theses stemmed from his work, and they form a true compendium of his thought. We look forward to being able to publish such a compendium subsequently. In Panama in 1996, a declaration was approved on the Inter-American Declaration on the Codification of International Law. The countries of the Americas there reaffirmed that the Organization of American States stands as the primary and irreplaceable forum in which the member states, under equal conditions, can adopt legal standards hemisphere-wide. They affirmed their commitment to continuing with this process and the codification of international law. A year later, at the General Assembly 25 years ago in Lima, we adopted the Inter-American program that set forth the activities that are required in this context. There have been a number of processes and programs. This has included the internet regulations and the focus on instructors who have allowed for international law to be included in the new training of attorneys. And in Uruguay, we began these tests in 1999, followed with, and we started, of course, in my home country again of Uruguay, and we continued in Mexico, in Brazil, in Managua, Costa Rica, Chile, Canada. The meeting in Canada particularly was important because one of the challenges of our law is that this is formed very often under the concept of continental law. But Canada also gives us the possibility of sharing both continental law, civil law, as well as common law. And we can imagine that we had just one common law country when this organization was founded, and this has, of course, grown tremendously over the years. Therefore, the Canadian experience has been very fruitful and useful in this regard. The regulations on the protection of human rights, of course, are seen in the Commission and the Court, but we also see additional contributions in terms of the Convention on Corruption, as well as the Belém do Pará Convention. The Department for Juridical Affairs has worked within its available human and financial resources to bring to fruition its commitment to this international program. We have seen a number of different publications, again, over the course of the years in that same vein. Let me also recognize those who have stood in the position of the Secretary for Legal Affairs prior to my tenure, who have created an outstanding, although small, team that has allowed for continuity in our work. The Secretary General Luis Almagro has been an ongoing source of support. We can see his participation, of course, in Rio and in many of the different fora that we've organized over the course of the years. Lastly, Madam Chair, I would like to thank you for this new session that will enable us to share with so many of our beloved jurists, but to present the challenges that we have. I would like to give the floor to Dr. Dante Negro, the Director of the OAS Department for International Law.
Director of the OAS Department of International Law. Dr. Negro, welcome. You have the floor.
Madam Chair of the Permanent Council, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, representatives to the Permanent Council. Since the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law, PD, was adopted by the General Assembly in 1997 and updated in 2011 within the framework of the principles and purposes of the Charter and the Declaration of Panama and the Inter-American Contribution to the Development and Codification of International Law of 1996. Since then, the General Assembly has annually reaffirmed the importance of the program and reiterated support for it on a biannual basis. The reports that have been issued can be seen on our department's website. For more than a decade, the OAS decided to make its work more efficient and effective by focusing on the four well-known pillars: democracy, human rights, the comprehensive development, and multi-dimensional security. However, in this laudable effort, international law lost visibility, so much so that the work being done on development and the codification now has to be channeled, for example, within the reports on the programmatic results that are periodically evaluated in the organization, either as part of democracy or the human rights pillar. In light of this set of circumstances, when it was decided to bring together the multiple GA draft resolutions into omnibus drafts, great efforts had to be made to maintain at least one independent resolution on international law, even questioning the need for such independence. In 2016, when the omnibus resolutions were first adopted, the section on international law had few sections, and the operative paragraphs were fundamentally procedural in nature. 5 years later, reality shone through, and the GA resolution on international law has not only become more substantive in content, but also incorporates several sections on specific topics of interest to the member states. This was added to an unprecedented event, and that is a complete section on private international law, a topic that had been absent on the agenda of the organization for over 2 decades. I'm not going to refer in detail to this latter point, but I would like to note that on the occasion of the special session held by the CAJP last week on private international law, the International Law Department prepared a document containing the current inter-American legal acquis in this area, as well as the proposals for possible courses of action to assist the member states in identifying strategies for the organization to jumpstart its activities in the area of codification and progressive development of jurisprudence in this area. As we stated at that meeting, jumpstarting the topic of private international law on the OAS agenda not only responds to the important role the region has traditionally played in the development of private international law norms and standards, but also the current need of a large part of our citizens to see ensured legal solutions to the greatest challenges posed by the current high level of cross-border mobility, that is to say, to ensure due transnational justice. This, of course, without duplicating the efforts being undertaken in other international fora. In fact, for some years now, our department has redoubled its efforts to work in coordination with such fora. And today we can highlight the work that we carry out with entities such as UNIDROIT, UNCITRAL, and the Hague Conference on Private International Law, with which we will hold the second joint meeting with the legal advisors on private international law of the Ministries of Foreign Affairs of the member states. These joint meetings, along with those organized periodically by the Inter-American Juridical Committee in-house, ensure the full interaction of the technical areas where international law is developed and promoted with the specific needs of the member states, expressly directed through their own legal advisors. Let me highlight also the major efforts that have been undertaken in the context of this technical secretariat. As you know, not a single year has gone by without our department submitting at least one concrete product to the political bodies of the organization. And in fact, there were 4 in 2021, 3 in 2020, and so on and so forth, including 2 soft law products were subsequently approved by the General Assembly of the organization. That is the Model Inter-American Law 2.0 on access to public information and the updated principles on privacy and personal data protection, which demonstrates not only the commitment of this institution to fulfill and comply with the mandates of the General Assembly and its technical secretariat, but also to progressively develop international law while contributing to the internal development and the legislation of member states. When we refer to the great historical legal developments the OAS has achieved, the more recent developments go unnoticed quite often, but there are many, and they reflect the new challenges posed by the world today. Topics under development, as have been mentioned by the committee. These include the effectiveness of foreign judicial decisions, international education, new technologies, and their relevance for international legal cooperation, to just mention a few. And just to mention a few. And therefore, the rich legal heritage that has been accumulating in the organization must be promoted and disseminated. As requested by the GA, our department has been promoting the dissemination of these topics through courses both on-site and online, as well as through publications and activities that reach a large number of people and that are disseminated through the corresponding publications of the Department of International Law and its website. More recently, the General Assembly requested that the Department of International Law, through a resolution adopted in 2021, continue promoting technical training, cooperation, and knowledge sharing with the Ministries of Foreign Affairs and International Development of member states through their respective diplomatic academies. In this regard, after holding refresher courses on the Inter-American legal system with the Diplomatic Academy of Chile last year, we offered additional courses to Chile, Ecuador, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, and Uruguay, with expressions of interest from several other countries. With this presentation, Madam Chair, I wanted to highlight the impact that PD is having and the rich programs that it produces with concrete results. But to go hand in hand with this, the representatives of member states also need to let us know what you need and to promote these activities proactively in your countries among those who could benefit from them. International law is not expressly considered a pillar of the organization, but I would say that it is a foundation of each of the 4 pillars. Without the legal foundations provided for by international law, the success of these organizations would be jeopardized by the absence of legal security that ensures respect for the rights, obligations, and standards that are part of each of those pillars. I would therefore like to conclude this presentation requesting in the most open and honest way possible that we close ranks so that the program can continue to be strengthened and that we continue to look ahead, identifying the specific needs of all member states in terms of the development and promotion of international law. Please count on our firm commitment and enthusiasm in this task, because we believe firmly that international law is at the very foundation and the heart of all this wonderful organization stands for and represents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Negro, for your the presentations of our distinguished guests, beginning with the presentation of His Excellency Aristides Royo, Minister of Canal Affairs of Panama. I request the Secretariat to show the intervention of Minister Royo.
Your Excellence, Ambassador Price, the permanent representative of St. Vincent and Grenadines before the OAS and President of the Permanent Council. Honorable Mr. Luis Almagro, ASG. Mr. Nestor Mendez, ASG, and Ms. Almagro, Secretary General. Ms. Maria Roquever, Permanent Representative of Panama. Permanent representatives and alternate members of accredited states before the OAS, ladies and gentlemen. Since the independence of the American countries, we have seen a series of principles and norms which have been accepted over the years. Many different doctrines, agreements between the countries, and the creation of institutions which protect the fulfillment of rules are currently part of what we could call international American law. I consider it very important the role that the OAS has to be able to make the countries that are part of this very important international entity to be able to establish their criteria regarding these topics, amongst which I'm interested in mentioning those of human rights of part of the population in our countries who still have not been duly protected in the laws of all member states. I would like to more specifically talk about the rights of LGBTQIA+. In some of our states, same-sex marriage is still not allowed, and when they are together as a couple, they are not allowed to adopt. One of the problems which involve the biggest issues is the criminalization of abortions, which violates the rights of women to freely decide their reproductive rights. Considering abortion a crime is to convict women of lower income because those who have resources are able to go to clinics where they have the abortion without danger. This between men and women is in such a manner that if a boy decides to practice vasectomy, they just have to be over 18 to do so. On the other hand, for women, they are required to determine a final contraceptive manner in many years after 18 years of age and to have had at least 2 children. On the other hand, it is necessary to allow that people with disabilities have a right to decide their sexual preferences. The rights I am mentioning have been a challenge of recognition by the UN and also by the OAS, having produced important rulings by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Despite this, we still see in some other countries, because of a lack of proper rules on sexual education, because of an influences of religion, or because of invoking a supposed differentiating idiosyncrasy, they have not seen by the legislative bodies the rules on the respect and protection of human rights of LGBTQIA+. They deserve to be promoted to be part of the legal system of each country and of international American law. It shall not be an easy task to do this, but on these topics we still see in all of our countries but we will have to undergo the task of educating people since their school classes and in mass media, but it will also be necessary to convince the governments at a level of their entities, at a executive, legislative, and judicial levels to respect the rights of LGBTQIA+. I hope that the concerns on this segment of the population are able to become a declaration, agreements, conventions, treaties, or any other instrument which is a part of international law which is applicable, which, despite their legal framework, will have a very important humanitarian front. Thank you very much.
I ask the delegation of Panama to convey our thanks to the Minister of Canal Affairs for his participation in today's celebration. I now give the floor to Professor Monica Pinto, Professor Emerita at the Law School of the University of Buenos Aires. Professor Pinto, welcome, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam President. It's my great honor to be with you this afternoon. Muchísimas gracias, señores delegados, por esta invitación que me...
Thank you very much, delegates, for this invite, which is a great honor for me. And it's a pleasure to share this event with all of you, friends and colleagues on this panel. We are celebrating the 25 years of the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law, which the OAS established in Resolution 1471 of 1997. The Organization of American States has occupied of strengthening the knowledge of international law, of inter-American law, in many different manners. Since 1974, as we have heard, Dr. Righi tell us, we have established the International Law course under the patronage of the Inter-American Juridical Committee. A very important course, as well as its repercussions. It's very important to see its content, but above all, or even more important, is the networking which it gives a space to. I would say that I have seen the 8th course of 1981, which was the very first which Antonio Augusto Cansado Trindade gave. Since then, we were colleagues, friends, and we got together and supported ourselves throughout all of our lives with joint activities, with prologues in books, panels and conferences, and even when he was the judge in the Inter-American Court and I an expert or before the International Court of Justice as an attorney. For that course alone, it would have been valuable. But there I also met, and I have also had friendships with Tatiana Marcot, which today we could call an empowered and very capable woman, with Didio Perdi, who then took very high position in his countries in Uruguay, and who continues to be a friend. It's a great pleasure to be able to see him. With Hidalgo Jimenez de Arrecha, the person from Rio de la Plata who generated so much pride with Renato Ribeiro, my dear friend from Brazil. A course which also brought us lessons from William Taglas, who chaired the committee of Francisco Garcia Amador, Don Rafael de la Colina, Don Arruto Valadão, Ever Arguet, and Sidora Sanochi. I returned in 2015 as a professor, and that year, once again, I was with Antonio Cansado Trindade and with David Stewart, my dear friend and colleague in this panel, and the luck of sharing, as the years have allowed, a panel with former teachers, with Ignacio Bonderi and Gabriela Radares, who had also studied with me in the University of Buenos Aires. In overall terms, both the Inter-American Juridical Committee as well as the Secretariat of Legal Affairs of the OAS have strengthened the knowledge of international law and inter-American law. Apart from that, we have opened and strengthened the capacity of academia and public employees and diplomats. They have opened the this to the inter-American law. Jean-Michel Arrighi has told us that since 1999 until 2010, there have been special meetings for international law professors. This inter-American law, which, as Julio Barberis would said, is not a regional law, but yes, a specific reading of international law which the countries of the Americas perform regarding their topics, or as Gómez Paledo Padre said, the idea and the experience of the Americas. This inter-American system has allowed us to have good creations and good contributions in the broad sense of international law. When in July 1928, it's exactly 34 years, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights decided the case of Costillas, it took to the world a definition of a disappearance of people which was innovative and which allowed that for a long time that served as a basis for us to continue to use other tribunals such as the Strasbourg Tribunal. Inter-American law, when the Inter-American Court on Human Rights for cases of Argentina and Uruguay regarding the laws which had brought to the judiciary the massive violations of human rights in a recent past, created a regional standard, which was ahead of those which would appear of placing into force the Rome Statute of International Criminal Court. An inter-American system which since 2001 has allowed the Court of San Jose and Barros Alto received, highlighting the incompatibility of any measure of amnesty or pardon with the rights which have been placed, but also an Inter-American Commission which fought that what had been given to Raquel Martinez in 1996, that violation of which had been object by a person of the armed forces and the security forces was an act of torture, the same in 1999, which generated the idea of a dignified life for going to the children who live in the streets of Venezuela. This inter-American law, which we are all talking about today, we've seen us talking about limitations, questions, and associations. In a principle, we followed the European models of integration and cooperation of the Andean group, went on other examples without taking too much importance to these contexts. Later, we asked of ourselves about the rights and its creation when we declared unilaterally the rights on the continental shelf, on the territorial areas of the inclusive zones of free trade zones. When we looked at this type of development and the development of UNCTAD and ECLAC, we had the situations of the associations because the crises brought us together and allowed us to become all one, not only because of the Falkland Islands, but also when we saw the regional indebtedness in the 80s. America is generous and it shares its world vision and socializes the position to Tovar and Antonio Cansado Trindade, amongst many others, and the many other men and women who followed this path. This very same inter-American vision was the one which brought us all together at the beginning of the pandemic in an event organized by Jean-Michel Arrighi in May 2020. This inter-American law is our contribution to the world, but it is also our specific way to see international law. Thank you very much to you all.
Mr. Pinto, for your comprehensive presentation. I now give the floor to Professor Claudia Grossman, Professor of Law, Dean Emeritus, and the Raymond Geraldson Scholar for International and Humanitarian Law at American University, Washington College of Law, and member of the International Law Commission. Professor Grossman, welcome back to the Permanent Council. You have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Many thanks to you, Your Excellency, Ambassador Luan Gailen Gilchrist, Permanent Representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and President of the Permanent Council for the invitation to participate in this extraordinary meeting in such an important occasion. Es para mí un honor estar en compañía de los expositores de hoy, el doctor Jean.
Today, it's a great honor for me to be together with these other panelists, Jean-Michel Arrighi, Dante Maga, Professor Pinto, Professor David Stewart, and Alexandra Del Gonçalves. I will follow very carefully the intervention of the states in this opportunity. What we are looking at today is the program, the American Program for the Development of International Law, which is crucial from many perspectives for the Americas and as a whole. I'm going to make a reference, first of all, to a topic which is very general, the value of deciding topics on a legal basis with the contributions of inter-American law towards international law, the impact at a global level, the topics of the diffusion, and at this moment when we are celebrating what has been achieved. First of all, we must see that decisions might be adopted based on different criteria. One might be the correlationship of strength. Who has more elements of a military, economic, or political for the adoption of decisions? The other is done on different concepts of justice or morality. And there's a third possibility, which is to decide based on issues of a legal basis. There's no total difference. There are elements of power and strength and of a moral character in law. But law is part of an autonomous category, and the model law aspires in this autonomous category, which includes the act of determination, the non-intervention, the principle of sovereign equality and human rights to the extent of all of us in the same bar. And this is a contribution to the decision-taking which bear in mind very important values. So we have to give value when we are talking about these characteristics of model law vis-à-vis other possibilities of the adoption of decisions. This option, because of the characteristics of the hemisphere of deciding on based of legal basis, has had an extraordinary importance in our region. In the front of human rights, we must highlight the importance of the American Declaration of Human Rights, of the rights and duties of men adopted 6 months before the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. Additionally, a very important contribution which was criticized in the American region, which was the principle of non-discrimination. In the hemisphere, there was a tension between two principles. One was that of a protection of foreigners, a minimum standard, and the right to be treated in a certain manner, and the position of Latin America, which said that foreigners only have a right to not be discriminated. But both theories didn't give rights to the inhabitants of the region who were not foreign. And one issue which is very important, the creative theory of a minimum standard and a non-discrimination, was to reach an agreement which led to the American Declaration, which in all the statements it establishes something which is crucial. It lists all people in the right to not be tortured. All have the right to a name. All people have a right to a dignified life. And this is something which is essential for civilization. To this extent, the hemisphere had a very important role in having a legal liability which we saw till that moment. Another very important development in the region was the principle of non-intervention, and how this recent fact with the protection of democracy with two fronts, two different pillars of human dignity. This principle is linked to the doctrine, which is where Carlos Kepler, Luis Maria Drago, the Drago Porte Convention, the Charter of the American States. These principles, such as the American Declaration, had a characteristic of aspiring to something, and in many different moments of violations to the rights of men and women in the hemisphere, levels of violations also to the principle of non-intervention, but they avoided a legal emptiness. And this led to the possibility of demanding the fulfillment of law. Inter-American law also had very important steps to establish rules which are related to reparation, to universal reparation to the victims, which is not only from an economic standpoint, but also to satisfaction and non-repetition measures, where Antonio Cansado Trindade had a very important role in the American Institute, the Inter-American Court, and also the International Court of Justice. One of our giants of our time projected the hemisphere in this direction. There are many other contributions which have been mentioned by Dr. Pinto. But in concluding this, I must say, to meet my time constraints and to thank Arrighi for the program that he has started, and also to present two ideas. Because when we're looking towards the past, we have to see what we can do to focus on the future. The first is the need to expand the capacity of international law in education. I believe that we have to look at a level of the exchange of students in our region on the basis of having an organization, a university, an organization in the hemisphere, which allows students from the north and the south and between the different regions to see exchanges with a need to fulfill some obligations. For example, to offer the capacity to teach this for 2, 3, 4 people. And the second idea is to collaborate with other international organizations, as is the case of the International Organization of the United Nations for the Promotion of Law, and in this case, international law. On the 26th and 27th, we are organizing, for example, the launch of the level of the increase of the level of the seas. And I believe it's very important the Inter-American Juridical Committee conduct a study of the Americas in this sense, the protection of human rights, the right to life, and what to do with the baselines, for example, positions in which Latin America and America as a whole will have a crucial role. I'd like to thank you once again for the invitation, and I believe that based on the past, we have a journey ahead of us, inspiring ourselves on the need to promote the values of human dignity to reach the world in which we all want to live in. Thank you very much.
Mr. Grossman, for your most informative presentation. I now give the floor to Mr. Alejandro Alday Gonzalez, Director General of the Matias Romero Institute, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mexico. Mr. Alday, welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for your kind invitation to this special session. Saludo muy atentamente a los representantes.
Very warm greetings to the permanent representatives, to the OAS, to the Secretary General, to the ASG. And I'd also like to thank the Permanent Mission of Mexico for allowing me to use the floor. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the OAS for the 25th anniversary of the program, which is the basis of this meeting, to recognize the activities of Dr. Jean-Michel Arrighi and Dr. Dante Negro for the progressive development and for the coding of international law in the framework of the OAS to promote the inter-American juridical system and to teach international law in our hemisphere. Thank you very much for the course which was given a few months ago in Mexico for our Foreign Office. Undoubtedly, it is very relevant to count on these opportunities for food for thought on the role that international law has in international relations as a guarantee of a development, prosperity, and peace. Please allow me to invite you to think towards the future. Today, with the principle of what many people consider a new moment of international relations, international law has a very important role. We are seeing changes in geopolitics. We are seeing the appearance of multipolarity in the world. We are witnesses of a big technological development with all the situations and implications it has, the positive and those that are risky for the states and for society. We have seen an increase in the number of global risks for the populations with the pandemics, and science shows us that there are even more and more coming, such as climate change and the challenges it has, the very high temperatures, the risk in which the small island states see with the increase of the sea level, something which has just been mentioned by Dr. Grossman, and the series of legal effects that this will have for aforementioned states and for the international community as a whole. And the OAS cannot be disconnected from this thought and from the legal work. We are seeing our effects in our region of the armed conflicts, and we are living, I say this in a very respectful manner, a crisis in multilateralism at a global level because the institutions are not being sufficiently effective in order to provide solutions to our populations regarding those risks. Therefore, with this panorama, we once again see the importance of respecting international law which is in force, and also to develop it progressively to meet new realities which we undoubtedly will see our region facing. The member states of the Inter-American State historically have put a lot of burden on international law. We have an archive, a legal archive of great wealth, and in difficult moments, law has been the vehicle to solve our conflicts. A greater number of cases, a greater percentage of cases before the International Court of Justice come exactly from this region, which shows the respect which we member states of the OAS have for international law. And for that reason, we should not relegate our system of rules to a secondary one, which might be in certain occasions depending on public conditions. A few minutes ago, we saw aspects which could be developed to meet the new realities in the world. In a concrete case, we see the activities in cyberspace, with all its big advantages, also represents important risks for the states and for the people when there's a criminal use of technological tools which can also challenge democracy, peace, and international security. And also there's a risk for them to be used by non-state players. In the case of artificial intelligence, likewise, we must guarantee that the use of their huge challenges keep harmony with the fundamental rights which protect our system, our inter-American system of human rights. I would like to join the call which has been made by Minister Arroyo on the inclusion of the rights which he mentioned in a reference in his talk. Another example, a concrete example of what we can work on, is that of the companies before the fundamental rights which are being challenged, a topic which the Inter-American Judicial Committee has already dealt with, but that despite this, its study can even expand to other activities in companies and in industries. For example, those which develop sophisticated weapons which end up in the hands of transnational crime, transnational organized crime through illicit trafficking, a topic which many countries, including Mexico, dedicate huge legal and diplomatic efforts to able to face this. It is always important to recall that the OAS has the Inter-American Judicial Committee, an advising board in the field of international law, precisely to develop these and other subjects which are requested by the member states of the organization through its bodies in order to be able to have a legal framework which is solid, sophisticated, to meet the new realities of our international environment. Madam Chair, the Permanent Council, employing international law in order to guarantee the international relations and to guarantee the proper functioning of the international organizations, such as the OAS, should not occur at a second level. The principles on which the Inter-American system is based on and the rules which guide it at its different levels are the best guarantees of its stability and its usefulness for our countries. the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law offers huge opportunities to strengthen our activities and the benefit of the societies in this continent. That is why I celebrate what we are celebrating today, its first 25 years. Thank you very much.
To conclude with the initial presentations, I am pleased to offer the floor to Professor David Stewart, Professor from Practice at the Georgetown University Law Center, Chair of the Board of Directors of the American Branch of the International Law Association, and member of the American Law Institute. Professor Stewart, welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is a privilege to address the Council as part of the celebration of the 25th anniversary of the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law. Since I agree wholeheartedly with the points that have already been made by the previous speakers, I will offer only 3 brief comments for the Council's consideration. First, international law in both its public and private dimensions remains an essential component of our inter-American system. And in my view, it is today more relevant and more important than ever. As Dr. Arregui and Dr. Negro rightly observed in their opening comments, international law and international legal institutions provide a fundamental part of our hemisphere's structure for stable relations, for the peaceful settlement of disputes, and for our collective efforts to promote economic development and cooperation, as well as respect for fundamental human rights and freedoms. Our hemisphere has much to offer the global community in all of these areas, and I join Professors Pinto and Grossman in saying that the program for the development of international law deserves the continued strong and active support of this organization and its members. The law can't solve all problems, of course. Recent global events demonstrate once again that even today, states on occasion refuse to comply with their most fundamental legal obligations on the world stage, creating grave threats to international peace and security. But without legal rules and procedures, those threats would surely be more frequent and more severe. Second, the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law provides the conceptual framework for our organization's activities in the field, including both public and private international law. Most importantly, by establishing the basis for the continuing work of the Department of International Law and for the work of the Inter-American Juridical Committee, which, as you noted, I had the privilege of serving on for a number of years. This is true not just in our own hemisphere, but at the global level as well. Through the activities of the Department and the Juridical Committee, the organization has played and will continue to play an important role in the global legal community. Finally, as members of the Council know well, the field of international law is not static. It continues to evolve, in particular to meet new challenges, to provide solutions to those challenges. Here, I'm thinking not just about shifting political, economic, or security arrangements, but also about the challenges posed in such fields as global health. Consider, for instance, the implications of the ongoing COVID pandemic, or new forms of information and communications technology, in particular their implications for privacy and human rights, and the critical threats to our global environment, such as global warming, sea level rise, air and ocean pollution, and food insecurities, to name only a few. In my view, it is essential for this organization to continue to recognize the importance of those issues and developments, and to draw on the experiences and expertise of our member states in the fields of private as well as public international law, and to support the collective efforts of all our members to achieve the goals of the program. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Professor Stewart, for your comprehensive presentation and insights. Dear colleagues, we will now proceed with the interventions from member states. Before proceeding, I respectfully remind the distinguished delegations of the provisions of Article 46 of the Rules of Procedure, which states, statements by members of the Permanent Council and officials participating in its meetings shall, in each case, be limited to 5 minutes. The chair shall adopt the measures he or she considers advisable to comply with this provision. Thank you all for your cooperation. The floor is open for participation by member states. I recognize Ecuador. Ecuador, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ecuador welcomes this important meeting in which we are celebrating this important 25th anniversary of the Inter-American Program for the Development of Law. Our delegation takes notes and appreciates the remarks made by Professor and Dr. Oregui and the Director of the International Law Department, Dante Negro, that recognize and acknowledge the very prolific work of the program over these 25 years. We also appreciate and take note of the remarks by our speakers, especially those of Minister Arroyo and Professor Grossman, with whom I have profound professional and personal ties. I also recognize the remarks and the recognition of our dear professor from the Institute of International Affairs. Dear colleagues, Ecuador joins other countries in welcoming and recognizing the important role of the Inter-American Program as started in 1997 and updated in 2011. The work by the General Assembly and the corresponding institutions have meant that it has served as a means of codifying international law in the framework of the organization, which undoubtedly has contributed to the strengthening of the inter-American system. In addition to allowing instruction to be provided on this topic across the region, we also have the following of the Juridical Affairs Committee in this regard. Ecuador also recognizes the contribution of the program from member states through the ongoing consulting and advisory services provided by the department in a number of different substantive areas addressed by the program. As such, we can see opportunities to update international law in keeping with the legal principles of the organization as well as the principles that inspire it. It is therefore particularly important to highlight the work of the program and the consultative body under which it operates, as well as the implementation of the program for the dissemination of both the public and private law, as well as the other dimensions that have been mentioned by our distinguished speakers. The different remarks by Professor Oregui and Professor Pinto with regard to the jurisprudence from the Inter-American Commission, as well as what Professor Grossman has said about the principles that inspire the Inter-American system, as well as more recently the guides, the model laws, and the broad range of other efforts that are so important for all of the member states. In this framework, among the documents that are so important recently are the development and the codification of international law on the model law on access to public information, for example, and the updating of the principles for personal data protection. In the case of Ecuador, this coincides with the approval of legislation in that same vein in May of last year. I should also note the virtual course on international law that has been held virtually in January of this year with the coordination of the OAS Juridical Department and the Alberto Plaza Lasso Diplomatic Academy of Ecuador. I appreciate the work of the OAS and the Academy in Ecuador, and that Montenegro has referred to in his remarks, and that also refers to the need to update our teaching strategies, as Professor Grossman has said. Distinguished members of the panel, speakers, these and other ongoing challenges mean that Ecuador redoubles its efforts to continue to strengthen the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law, as well as the internal work in terms of the internal instruments within the organization aimed at this same lofty goal. The program, ladies and gentlemen, provides additional impetus to international law in the Americas in our daily relations, both among individuals as between countries. As Claudio Grossman has said previously, it's one thing to see what happens in the Constitution and legislation, and something different happens in practice. That is to say that in addition to practice, we need to ensure that the principles that inspire the inter-American legal system are equally valid and efficacious in terms of the concept of law that has formed the foundation of the training of so many jurists. Thank you. For Uruguay, the 25 years of the Inter-American Program this is not just an opportunity for strict celebration. This is a greater event. All those of us who come from a legal background and that have a broad understanding of legal concepts as an underpinning of our daily actions and lives, recognize how important the work of the program is to that. And when we have a true understanding, again, of all of these legal underpinnings, the defense of democracy, of equality, of freedom, and these are indeed glorious principles. And they stem, of course, from Roman law and to all of the intervening constructs that humankind has developed in the intervening centuries. And we must acknowledge this, because there are times at which uncertainty arises as a result of the so-called crisis in multilateralism. But the fact is that multilateralism has always been able to make a great leap forward and to overcome conflict in terms of dispute resolution, of finding a way to get along, and sometimes even to serve as that magic arbitrator of what we call consensus, which often seems out of reach, but is nonetheless possible. And in that context, we see that law evolves. Law evolves and must evolve as societies do, as appetites change, as things change. Our society today is unrecognizable in terms of just a few short years ago. Things are completely different from other eras. And yet, the understanding of rights, of life, nonetheless remains largely unchanged. There are ups and downs, of course, and this Council, of course, has on prior occasions reflected on such changes. But nonetheless, I believe it is increasingly solid. It is a question that is indisputable among countries. We cannot look at international law and look, for example, at the freedom of expression or freedom in terms of democracy or of the poorest people, of women, the rights of the most fragile members of society without looking at international law. And it creates this brainstorming of ideas that serves upstream and downstream simultaneously. And seeking to respect time, it doesn't matter which side of the debate of positivism in our juridical approach we stand. The important thing is that we stand together. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You have the floor, please.
Muchísimas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My delegation thanks the speakers and the organizers for this opportunity to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law. We thank the speakers for their remarks, including Dr. Arrighi, Dr. Dante Negro, from the OAS, and all of the distinguished panelists who have joined us today virtually, and particularly Alejandro Otay Gonzalez, the director of the Matias Romero Institute, who is joining us from the hall today. Costa Rica appreciates the work of Mexico in bringing to fruition this extraordinary session in which the panelists have recognized the outstanding work of the Department of International Affairs and the Department of International Law, specifically in the progressive study of both public law and international private law and humanitarian law in the context of the Secretariat for Legal Affairs of the OAS. Through the organization's efforts in the broadest possible sense and encouraging the presence of these topics on the agendas of member states. As part of our commitment in Costa Rica to strengthening the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law, we would like to highlight some of the actions that we have participated in actively with a view toward collaborating with the enrichment of the international inter-American system and the legal agenda of our organization. We recognize the work of the Department of Legal Affairs in hosting joint meetings in the area of foreign affairs of the member states, such as that held in September of last year, focusing on two topics of tremendous importance to the Inter-American Juridical Committee and the Permanent Council of the Hague, the area of private international law, including the recognition and execution of foreign judgments and use of technology in trans-border transactions and agreements. We also highlight the public access law and the model law on registries and public records of 2020, as well as the training efforts for judges and other civil servants, such as the International Forum for Data Protection and Access to Public Information in the Administration of Justice, held virtually in 2021, that was organized by the Judiciary of Costa Rica in an effort to encourage an encounter between Centers for Information and Documentation across the region to establish channels of communication that allow for the exchange of best practices on topics of shared interest. We further recognize the upsurge in activities in promoting and disseminating international law in the Inter-American Juridical Committee in the area of data protection, personal data protection, arbitration, real estate, and other areas of interest to different countries that are associated with people in situation of vulnerability, Afro-descendants, refugees, internal displaced persons, and people without a current citizenship. We also welcome and recognize the work that's been done on behalf of people of Costa Rica in conjunction with the Ibero-American Network for Personal Data Protection. We also acknowledge and appreciate the work in the area of international humanitarian law, working hand in hand with the International Committee of the Red Cross, as well as the work done to harmonize and codify private international law with a view toward ensuring effective instruments across the region and encouraging our member states to recognize foreign judgments. For Costa Rica, it is particularly important to continue to encourage cooperation, the exchange of knowledge, working hand in hand with the Ministries of Foreign Affairs of the member countries. In this regard, we'd like to express our appreciation for the ongoing course that was taught in April in Costa Rica for individuals from our foreign ministry that served as continuing education for the diplomatic academy, as well as the working hand in hand in that regard with the legal juridical committee of the OAS. This has strengthened our opportunities to strengthen and expand ties, strengthening the principles that we share in terms of the importance of multilateralism and other shared values such as peace, security, sustainable development, democracy, and justice. To conclude, Madam Chair, we would like to encourage member states to continue to support the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law of the OAS. As Dr. Negro has said, it is a fundamental pillar that brings together the 4 areas and 4 pillars that is always understood as a mechanism for seeking peace and strengthening democracy. Thank you very much.
I now offer the floor to Guatemala. You have the floor, please.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much. Guatemala presents its respect to the Secretary General, to the Assistant Secretary General, to the Secretary for Legal Affairs, to the Director of the Department of International Law, as well as our speakers for their remarks. Madam Chair, the OAS Charter establishes that international law is a standard for the actions of member states in their relations. Therefore, Guatemala recognizes the work of the International and the Juridical Committee, the Technical Secretariat for Legal Affairs, for the progressive development, codification, and dissemination of international law across the region. It is within that framework that the Department of International Law has instituted this Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law, adopted in 1997 by the member states of the OAS, which seeks to contribute to the codification of international law in the framework of the Organization of American States and to encourage, to the extent possible, cooperation across the region, as well as coordination for instruction in international law across the region in 2011, 2016, and in 2020. As a result of new developments in terms of international law, the General Assembly has renewed and revitalized the commitment of the member states in this regard, and ask the Department of International Law to continue implementing it. The department, furthermore, has been tasked among other actions in ensuring instruction across the region, including organizing with the coordination of the different member states, classes at the sub-regional and national levels on aspects associated with inter-American international law. The objective is to provide diplomatic personnel, legislators, judges, members of the armed forces, and other senior civil servants with a greater understanding of the work done within the heart of the OAS and the agreements forged under its aegis. Ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chair, Guatemala has had the support of the Department of International Law in hosting in 2021 and 2022 an updating course on the Inter-American system that is providing for an update in Guatemala of these very important academic activities. Furthermore, in 2021, we signed a framework agreement between the Secretariat of the OAS and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Guatemala with a view toward continuing to identify opportunities for academic and scientific coordination in the area of international law with a view towards strengthening national capabilities in this regard. My delegation would also highlight the important contributions reported in the most recent biannual report submitted by the program in the area of the development of international law, such as the Model 2.0 law on access to public information and the guidelines on the application of civil law in the region and contract law, rather. We have expressed a keen interest in this area. Madam Chair, Guatemala also appreciates this 25th anniversary celebration, and appreciates and thanks the Inter-American Juridical Committee and the Department of International Law for the key role that they have played in bringing this to fruition. Historically, international law has set the OAS at the forefront of international organizations in this regard. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. La delegación de la República del Paraguay.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Paraguay appreciates the invitation from the Permanent Council with a view toward celebrating this 25th anniversary of the program and recognizes in that regard the permanent mission of Mexico for bringing this initiative to our attention. We also appreciate the remarks by all of our panelists. On that note, I'd like to refer to what the General Assembly said in 1995 in Lima in approving the program and the resolution, saying the treaties approved by the Organization of American States are an important legal heritage that must be protected and disseminated broadly. Second, the role of the political institutions allow for negotiation, the drafting of new legal instruments in the heart of the organization. 3, it is of the utmost importance to disseminate the legal work of the organization, and 4, stressing the importance of international law. It is of the utmost importance and to continue to disseminate it through educational aspect. Over the course of the last 25 years, looking at the global regional circumstances, we affirm that these principles continue to be as in force and as important today as they were then. We can see the severe impacts on the continent where we thought that war had been left by the wayside. We've seen the impact of climate change and of the pandemic, which calls and issues a call of alert to our region in terms of reiterating and redoubling our commitment to the rule of international law. Madam Chair, Paraguay, since its founding, has sought to defend international law. In the process for independence, in a note issued to the officials in Paraguay in 1911, on this very same date of July 20th, Paraguay stated that the country did not seek to impinge upon the rights of any other country, but refused to renounce its right. The intervening 100+ years have been clear evidence of this statement by our founding fathers. In line with that history, Paraguay reiterates its commitment to international law and particularly its development in the inter-American sphere. We furthermore recognize the work by a very well-known Paraguayan jurist in this regard, including the vast heritage and trajectory and ages in terms of the academic wherewithal of the researchers at the OAS and the work that has been done by them throughout the Americas. Thank you very much.
Was next, and now, by leave of Chile, I now offer the floor to Canada. Thank you, Chile.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I'm sorry to have made a mess out of the speaking order, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. J'aimerais commencer en remerciant les conférenciers pour leur présentation aujourd'hui et la mission de Mexico pour.
I would like to start by thanking the speakers for their presentation today and Mexico for organizing this session this afternoon. It's a great pleasure to join the celebration of the 25th anniversary for the development of international law. The historical contribution of the OAS towards the progressive development and coding of international law, as has been said by Mr. Jean-Michel Arrigui in his presentation, is something impressive. The Department of International Law is very old in this list of activities of this program, working towards the best understanding of the international legal system, and as such, as was mentioned by Mr. Arrigui, including the system of common law and civil law, which is part of our hemisphere. And this is international law, which is based on rules. I'm going to continue with other comments in English.
Law can play an important role in support of human rights, and perhaps areas where we need to strive to do more. The issue of LGBTI rights, for example, was raised this afternoon, and other areas as well. So we're grateful for those contributions to our dialogue and to our conversations. And I wanted to finish by noting in particular the course on international law that's organized each year by the Inter-American Juridical Committee and the Department of International Law in Rio de Janeiro. This provides a really important opportunity for young jurists from the region to better understand the specificities of the inter-American legal system, and we very much welcome the opportunity to work with you to find ways to increase the participation of youth, including Canadian students, in this course. So in closing, Madam Chair, let me encourage continuing work in coordination with relevant international and academic organizations to support and to ensure complementarity of efforts in support of international law. And once more, thank all colleagues and all of the panelists for the opportunity this afternoon to have this discussion and for this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Adset. I thank the Ambassador of Chile for his consideration, and I'm now pleased to offer him the floor. Excellency.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We recognize the organization of this extraordinary session to celebrate the 25th anniversary for the development of international law. Therefore, we would like to thank the Mexico mission for its leadership in organizing this session, and we take note of all the very interesting interventions by the panelists who have participated today. There's a very special greeting to Claudio Grossman, who, as commented in his intervention in all the many issues that are linked to international law, there's a webinar with increasing of the level of law, international law, of its impact in the Americas. This is organized by the University of Chile, Belize, before the UN. And this seminar will take place for next week on the 26th and 27th of July, which I think might be of interest of the many different member states and missions. Madam Chair, today we are called on to the most relevant program in terms of the development of international law in our hemisphere. Its contribution to the development and the coding of international law for the promotion and dissemination of the inter-American juridical system and teaching international law in this region has allowed us to advance and to consolidate and seize substantial issues, proposing and facilitating this treatment and incorporation in each one of the member states. One of the examples which was very clearly mentioned by the panelists who have been part to this session. Therefore, each one of our states has benefited from the advances promoted by this program at the same time in which we have been able to see a level to be able to contribute with the activities collaborating and identifying new fields of opportunity for the development and promotion of international law. In that sense, we recognize the commitment and the efforts set forth by the Legal Affairs Secretariat in each one of its departments. Likewise, we highlight that, as indicated in the last biannual report of the program, we are glad to see that the gender perspective starts to involve each one of the areas involved by the International Law Department. We believe that this will give proposals and more fair and inclusive solutions. Therefore, we would like to, based on, as Minister Arroyo has mentioned, this is going towards a humanitarian view. Madam Chair, at this moment of celebration, we emphasize our commitment to the program and to the principles and purposes which inspire our organization, and obviously for the development and respect for international law, a basic principle of the foreign policy of Chile and of the states in its relationships. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Excellency, I'm now pleased to offer the floor to the Ambassador of Mexico. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My delegation would like to mention its satisfaction for the celebration of the 25th anniversary of the Inter-American Program for International Law, one of the OAS instruments to fulfill the role of promoting the progressive development and the coding of international law in our hemisphere. A very special warm greeting to the former president of Panama, Arroyo. My organization would like to thank the different panelists for their participation in this special session of the Permanent Council under the organization of my delegation for many, many months. We give great value to the reflections of the jurists of the Americas, which allow us to place into perspective the work of performing an analysis regarding the reach and the relevance of the decisions which we take here and legal safety. We celebrate the participation of the Mexican jurist Alejandro Anday in this very special session. In his participation in all the fora of this organization, Mexico conducts so as bearing in mind that the principles of international law are a role of behavior of the states on reciprocity and with respect to the personality, sovereignty, and independence of the states is crucial for the proper functioning of international order. With this conviction, my country has participated historically in preparing the legal regional heritage which the states of the Americas in equal conditions have created to consolidate for over 1 century the legal heritage of international public and private law, which sets up the body of the inter-American juridical system. My country keeps a specific interest in preserving and promoting this heritage, which is as established by the Panama Declaration on the Inter-American contribution to the development and coding of international law. This has been recognized in a universal plan, highlightedly for its contributions in the field of the protection of human rights and the principle of non-intervention and the establishment of the principle of non-intervention in order to establish the procedures for the peaceful dispute settlement and for the principles of asylum, amongst others. I'd like to recognize the activity of a team of the Secretariat of the Legal Affairs of the OAS, more specifically of the Department of International Law, who have been responsible for preserving the institutional memory in terms of the developments which comes from the different bodies, organizations, and entities of our organization. The Department of International Law works as an executive secretariat of the Inter-American Juridical Committee, a consultative body of the organization in terms of legal affairs, which has recently celebrated its 100th regular session in the city of Lima. We congratulate ourselves that thanks to the responsible work of the jurists who have been members of this committee for decades, the Inter-American Juridical Committee has been considered a crucial system of the Inter-American system, especially for all the activities in terms of legal research are conducted by universities and institutes as well as by the commissions and national entities, both international and national, for the survey, research, teaching, or organizing the international law. Based on the Mexican tradition of strengthening the Inter-American Juridical Committee, my country has presented solid candidates to the very highest level of jurists and have counted on the support of the member states, as we expect is also the case in the elections which will be held in the next General Assembly of the OAS. Madam Chair, the friendly and pacific relationship of the countries that make up the Inter-American Committee cannot be forgotten if it's not in the respectful relationship. The member states of the OAS must be very careful in honoring and improving the legacy of those who came before us and what we have seen through the Inter-American legal system and its institutions. We call on the Inter-American Juridical Committee, the Secretariat of Legal Affairs, and more specifically to the Department of International Law in order to keep their valuable work and call on the states to continue to strengthen their development and their coding. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
To offer the floor to the delegate of El Salvador. The floor is yours.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to all. My delegation would like to thank Madam Chair for calling this very important session in order to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law. We would also like to extend our thank you to the Permanent Council of Mexico for its efforts to make this session possible. We have taken note of the very valuable statements made by the Secretary of Legal Affairs and to the Director of the Department of International Law, as well as each and every one of the interventions which have been made by our renowned panelists who have honored us with their participation today. This 25th anniversary of the Inter-American Program for International Law, we see the very important development and coding of law, the important work to promote and diffuse the inter-American legal system, and to teach international law in the hemisphere. We would like to also congratulate ourselves for the important contribution made by the Department of International Law, trying always to consider the priorities of the current topics which we have to obtain a useful and new development in this development of the rules. Madam Chair, El Salvador emphasizes the importance of international law as the basis for the relations of international society and the need to strengthen our activities on this topic. we highlight the very important results of the program, amongst others the establishment of virtual libraries and of the promotion of very different studies, reports, treaties, and model laws, which set up what the organization does in the wealth of its legal library. We also consider the development of very relevant activities for training or conducting the course of international law, in which will take place in Brazil in its next edition during the month of August. We also celebrate the cooperation and exchange of knowledge with the many different diplomatic academia in the region, facilitating the implementation of courses and updating courses, refresher courses on the inter-American juridical system, in which recently our country has been benefited through the collaboration with the Diplomatic Institute that Dr. José Gustavo Moreno, which took place in a hybrid format. This process has benefited more than 40 diplomats from El Salvador, both in our headquarters as well as from those in abroad, and had fantastic speakers through which we took on the opportunity to thank them for and to thank the Department of International Law to strengthen the importance to give this very important support to the member states to strengthen their technical capacities. Madam Chair, despite the advances that the program has made possible to us, we still find challenges in what we must be working on. For example, a bigger reach of international private law in many different sectors and players in our society, using resources and accessible language. We see that we should continue looking at the progressive development in coding law in the study of legal problems which are related to the integration of the states in the continent, the possibility of looking at the topics which are necessary amongst other whenever there are solutions which are simple for our citizens. We also consider that it is necessary to expand the spaces to exchange experiences in terms of the law which is applicable to the commercial contracts and the security of neuroscience and neurotechnology, amongst others, that due to the global changes require more and more of our attention. To wrap up, El Salvador wishes to emphasize its very important commitment to the activities that in the last 25 years has been developed by the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law, and that is why we drive the member states to continue cooperating and working to strengthen it. We see many years of success and to strengthen the program. Thank you very much.
I'm now pleased to offer the floor to the permanent representative of the Dominican Republic. Excellency, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. Agradecemos.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We would like to thank the Chair of the Permanent Council and the Mission of Mexico for organizing this event. We'd also like to thank Dr. Jean-Michel Arrigui and Dante Negro, as well as all the panelists who have been with us today with their very valuable contributions, which is something that we have taken note of. The Dominican delegation sees the relevance and the importance of the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law, which today is celebrating its 25th anniversary, which was adopted in 1997 in the framework of the principles and purposes established in the Charter of the organization, bearing in mind the Declaration of Panama on the Inter-American Development of Law and Coding of International Law of 1996. Likewise, we allow ourselves to emphasize our contribution to the noble objectives of this program, which is to contribute to the development and coding of international law in the framework of the organization, to promote the biggest determination of inter-American juridical system, and to drive the development, diffusion, and teaching of international law in our hemisphere. It is important to highlight that the topics treated are of great importance, both for public law as well as for private law, and that this is something which allows us to promote the analysis and to generate open dialogue on the topics of relevance, as has been mentioned by Dr. Negro. As was said by Professor Grossman, the future is also something that we should be concerned with in this topic, specifically the implications, the legal implications of the increase of the sea level, which is of very much importance for the Dominican Republic. We commend the activities done by the International Law Department, the Secretariat of Legal Affairs, and the activities that they do to implement the program, the support given both for the political entities of this organization as well as the member states. Finally, the Dominican Republic emphasizes its commitment of strengthening the activities of the department under the framework of the Inter-American Development Program for the Development of International Law. This allows us to develop and promote international law and makes the inter-American judicial system wealthier. Thank you very much.
To offer the floor to the Ambassador of Argentina. Ambassador Raimundo, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias. El compromiso de la República Argentina.
Thank you very much. The commitment of the Republic of Argentina with international law and inter-American law is undoubtable. Law is a construction of a civilization to the effects of establishing limits to the abuses of power to the strongest of levels. We have heard today the crisis that we have seen at a global level. I would just like to mention three aspects. When this organization, the UN, the Pan American Health Organization, the World Health Organization, the G20, the UN, the World Trade Organization, voted with very great majorities and in some cases unanimously that the big pharmaceutical companies remove of intellectual property law for the vaccines in the pandemic. That is something which was not attainable. In June of 2021, 184 countries of the UN voted in favor of a resolution to lift the sanctions on Cuba. 2 countries voted against. The request of a majority was not obtained. Argentina has a very specific case, which is that the outstanding majority that we have in all international fora, requesting that the United Kingdom discuss the sovereignty dispute we have on the Falkland Islands. We haven't been able to obtain this. In other words, the majority desire of the states has faced a hurdle, or better say, to minority states that are very, very powerful, concrete data of a reality of multilateralism. Regarding law, laws such as economy, such as policy, are not aspects which are straightforward. The success of law is seen and measured in the terms of the effective fulfillment and the expansion of all the rights, of the right to health, of the right to leave poverty, of the right to enjoy the natural wealths of our countries in which our peoples are the owners. The right to be able to live in the land someone was born without having to migrate for reasons of need. This means that with all of the importance that this event today has, if the rights of a people who are made of flesh and bone, who have a name, who have a face, if this is included, this is a reality, it is not that better. Therefore, this event today not only should be a moment for us to celebrate, but also to rethink what is the final, most more in-depth sense of law. Thank you very much.
I'm pleased to offer the floor to the Ambassador of Brazil. Ambassador, you have the floor, sir.
Muchas
Obrigado, Sra. Presidente. Agradeço também pelas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd also like to thank everyone who has made a presentation today on the 25th celebration of the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law. This allows us to celebrate the advances already reached and to reflect on how to strengthen its implementation at a regional level and a national level. Brazil specifically thanks the Department of International Law and the Inter-American Juridical Committee for the continued efforts together with the member states, entities of the OAS, and civil society in order to promote and to develop international law at an inter-American level. The solid and lengthy tradition of Brazil and the commitment with international law is illustrated in our preference in what we see in the controversies, in the engagement and the defense of international law, and in our commitment in looking at the rule of law. At the inter-American level, we in Brazil have historically given a contribution to the development of inter-American law. Brazil was the host since 1906 of the Inter-American Joint of Jurisconsultos, which has seen many different updates until reaching our current inter-American system, which we continue to honor in the Itamaraty Palace in Rio de Janeiro, an iconic building which has also been the Presidency of the Republic, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the patron of our diplomacy, Rio Branco. For nearly 70 years, we have the satisfaction of organizing under the coordination of the General Secretariat, the Inter-American Juridical Committee, the international law, which is a reference in international law, and at a regional level, the 47th edition of the course will be conducted in August in person in the traditional headquarters in Rio de Janeiro. Here I would like to mention the invite which was accepted by Judge Renata Gil to express a lecture at a course in this edition. It is clear the tradition of Brazilian jurists dedicated to international law, many of which with the attention of the international tribunals, very specifically in the inter-American scope. With much pride, we see the very lengthy participation of Brazilian jurists in the Inter-American Juridical Committee, as the example of a Brazilian member, Professor Jorge Galindo, who is also a member of the Permanent Court of Arbitration, elected member of the International Law Department of the United Nations, and a legal advisor of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Brazil. International inter-American law is an institutional framework which is crucial for the harmonious development of relations in the hemisphere and a very valuable contribution offered by the region towards international law in general. Regarding the instruments of the hemisphere for international law, we are convicted that we're going to continue with its expansion amongst academia and the judiciary in the countries of the region in parallel with the efforts of their own member states. We have very specific memorandums of understanding established between the General Secretariat of the OAS and academia of the member states. In the case of Brazil, amongst the dozens of instruments which are part of the national bodies, we highlight the geographic diversity. Over 10 of the 27 states of the Federation have already been engaged in topics such diverse as technical cooperation, sustainable development, and to develop capacities in legal promotion. We consider of high importance to continue driving the interaction followed by the central governments between the Department of International Law, the Inter-American Juridical Committee, and the national and international bodies. The work that the International Law Department and the International Juridical Committee have been conducting in the OAS have been driving the promotion of inter-American law. The publication in 2020 of the Portuguese language guide on law applicable to international contracts in the Americas has favored the activity of the Inter-American Juridical Committee amongst the Brazilian professionals. Brazil records its support to continue to translate the Inter-American juridical activities into Portuguese. The development of international law in the Americas depends on the commitment of the member states and in parallel the efforts of the different bodies of the OAS. Brazil supports initiatives such as those in national levels for specific topics, such as, for example, was the case of a model law on societies and simplified societies and simplified SMEs. We look at the different political fora of the OAS, such as the CAGP, for the topics which are related to international law in the hemisphere. Finally, on the 25 years of the Inter-American Program, Brazil recalls with a lot of gratitude and in recognition the person and the legacy which is clearly seen by Professor Augusto Cansado Trindade, the former legal advisor of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Brazil, former president of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, a member of the Permanent Arbitration Court, and a judge of the International Court of Justice. I would like to thank all the manifestations of the kind words to Professor Trindade mentioned in this session of the Permanent Council, and since his death, in all messages which were conveyed to me, and I was very careful to convey to Professor Trindade's family, which amongst his legacy gave us a great level of diplomats in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The memory of Professor Trindade will definitely continue to be something very unique and special in the field of international law. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Bolivia, you have the floor. Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Chair, Secretary General, ASG, ladies and gentlemen. Bolivia, first and foremost, appreciate the delegation of Mexico for convening this meeting, as well as our speakers on this, the 25th anniversary of the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law. The program was originally adopted in 1997 in the framework of the principles and purposes set forth in the Inter-American, the OAS Charter, in the context of the Declaration of Panama to the codification of international law of 1996. Since then, the General Assembly has reaffirmed the importance of the program as well as its continuity. We also particularly greet the efforts at codifications and progressive development of international inter-American law in the private law area that the program has undertaken, as well as the training programs instituted throughout the Americas. We believe that it's fundamental to continue to support these efforts by member states as an opportunity to strengthen the underpinnings of the organizations that are those of the well-being of our people based on legal security, respect for international law, and the guiding principles of the OAS. It is of the utmost importance, therefore, that this organization stand as an example in keeping with our legal principles with regard to state sovereignty, transparency, and access to information, among others, to recover and the foundations and the founding principles of the organization. For all these reasons, Bolivia offers its support and congratulates the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law and the Directorate of International Law of the OAS for its initiatives. Thank you. Thank you, Bolivia.
I now offer the floor to Peru. Peru, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Assistant Secretary General, distinguished permanent representatives, delegates all. On behalf of the permanent representative of Peru, I would like to express our gratitude for this topic and the convening of this special session to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law. We also appreciate the initiative of Mexico in convening this session. We also greet especially the remarks of John Michel Arrighi, the Secretary for Legal Affairs, and Dante Negro, the Director of the International Law Department of the OAS, for their remarks and their outstanding summary of the work over the course of the last 25 years of the program, as well as the work that's been done by the CHAP and other groups within the organization to ensure the success of this program. We would like, Madam Chair, to reaffirm Peru's historical commitment to international law, and particularly to the guiding principles of social harmony and political harmony between and among countries, peaceful resolution of conflict, non-intervention in foreign states' affairs, and the defense and respect for human rights without any differentiation among others. This vocation of Peru has been reflected in its ongoing contribution in the construction of the inter-American legal system. One of the most important high points of this is undoubtedly the Inter-American Democratic Charter, and more recently the session number 100 under the leadership of Peruvian diplomat and jurist Sorrujano of the CHAP here in Lima, Peru. We also highlight the holding of the upcoming General Assembly in our country, which of course will be an honor to organize, working hand in hand with the OAS. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Gustavo Tarri, the floor is yours.
Gracias, Presidenta. Quisiera empezar.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Let me welcome again the celebration of the 25th anniversary of the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law, appreciating the sponsorship of Mexico for this event. I'd also like to recognize our distinguished panelists and their remarks who enable us to learn more about the very rich history of the program and the history of international law in the region. Madam Chair, I will endeavor to be brief. I'd like to refer to a statement made by Professor Dante Negro when he referred to the cross-cutting four pillars of the OAS with regard to international law, and I'd like to refer to two of those pillars: strengthening democracy on the one hand and the defense of human rights on the second part, and also highlighting the importance of the Inter-American Human Rights Court in strengthening those pillars. Concretely, the Inter-American Human Rights Commission and the Inter-American Charter. These are all instruments and mechanisms that are tremendously rigorous in terms of the Inter-American Convention on Human Rights and others, of course, clearly set the stage for the defense of human rights. The Inter-American Human Rights Charter also set forth the requirements for the respect of these. Dr. Jean-Michel Arregui has also referred to how the standards and the regulations of international law are translated and implemented domestically, and how important that this be the case, and what occurs when it is absent, not just in the context of legal sciences, but we can see on practice this gap between reality, between practice and the principles. We can see this, of course, in our inter-American system, most unfortunately. We also can see, of course, that an important number of countries, including Venezuela, there's practically no relationship between policy and practice, and the policies are completely manipulated. And in terms of the Inter-American Democratic Charter, there's nothing farther from the definition in terms of practice in Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. In the area of human rights, the Inter-American system has, of course, the Inter-American Human Rights Commission and the Inter-American Human Rights Court, which are both institutions of the utmost importance in the region in seeking to generate greater propinquity between policy and practice. But once again, we have no enforcement arm in this regard in terms of the rulings by both institutions, and this unfortunately continues to be a shortcoming and a stain on the system of the defense of human rights as well as the rule of law and democracy in the region. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The United States. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. The United States thanks the Department of International Law and the Permanent Mission of Mexico to the OAS for coordinating this meeting today. We also thank the speakers, especially Professor Dave Stewart, for their presentations. The United States welcomes the progress OAS member states have made over the years on the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law on many important legal issues facing our hemisphere, and we look forward to our continued collaboration in this area. Once again, thank you, Ambassador Banos, for highlighting this important anniversary. Thank you very much.
Thank you, United States. I'm now pleased to offer the floor to the Assistant Secretary General. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Muy buenas tardes. Expresamos nuestro beneplácito.
Good afternoon. We are very pleased to have the opportunity to host this meeting at the behest of Mexico to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law, with a view to ensuring that the states can identify their priorities in this same context for future activities. We are also pleased that last year, the 25th anniversary of the Declaration of Panama on the contribution of international law and its codification, adopted by the General Assembly in 1996, has been celebrated. The Inter-American Juridical Committee, the consultative body in legal affairs, in its most recent regular period of sessions in May in 2022 in Lima, issued a declaration that reminds that international law is the standard of operations for states in their reciprocal relations, and therefore it is of the utmost importance to understand it, to be familiar with it, disseminate it, and also to respect it, and to ensure that all states do so. In our view, this can be summarized in one phrase, and that is in terms of the importance of international law for our organization and the strategies that we must institute to continue to strengthen it. Furthermore, this declaration expresses a firm commitment that the OAS is the primary and irreplaceable, as well as the most appropriate forum where the member states of the region, in equal conditions and standing, can negotiate, adopt, and institute shared legal regulations in the international sphere, in both international public and private law, with a view toward regulating their relations hemisphere-wide. In effect, the OAS has contributed and continues to contribute in a very valuable fashion to the creation of a peaceful, fair, and just an egalitarian international order, and must continue to do so, and to encourage mutual understanding among the different cultures and countries of the Americas. We take note of the efforts that have been noted here today to continue to support the work of the program for the Secretariat for Legal Affairs and the Department of International Law, and the importance of continuing to support the latter's efforts. These efforts further are a high point of the organization and serve to underscore the importance of the 4 pillars underpinning the organization. Furthermore, the OAS and its role in codification and the progressive development of international law with regard to other regional organizations is unquestionable. The impact that we are seeking to attain in improving the quality of life of our citizens will depend directly on the dissemination that we can engage in of the very rich aegis that we have in legal affairs across the region. Without legal certainty, there is no way to ensure rights, and without the ability to ensure rights, we will not be able to continue to make progress as a region. In the context of the celebration, we seek to reaffirm our commitment to strengthening procedures to adopt regulations and standards within the organization, both those that are legally binding, as well as the principles of soft law, which, as we have rightly seen today, also play an important role in the harmonization and standardization of the regulations across countries. We trust that this session will stand as an unequivocal expression of the political will of the member states to strengthen the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law in a fashion that meets the expectations of all, and that we can soon celebrate another anniversary with opportunities to continue to celebrate the best strategies to strengthen both international public and private law. Thank you very much.
Colleagues, we have concluded consideration of all items on the agenda of today's meeting. Having heard today's presentations and comments on the celebration of the 25th anniversary of the Inter-American Program for the Development of International Law, I wish to propose that the Permanent Council take note of the presentations made by the special guests, as well as those of the delegations and the Assistant Secretary General on behalf of the Secretary General. Before closing the meeting, let me reiterate my appreciation to all delegations, invited speakers, and officials of the Secretariat for Legal Affairs for their enlightening contributions. We look forward to continued discussions on this important instrument as we seek to strengthen the legal framework of the Inter-American system and our organization. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.